What is up, everybody? Welcome to the Build a Mind podcast. We are here with Will, our co-host, and Michael Carter from Bitsbetrippin, and it's going to be a good episode today. We're going to learn a lot about Bitcoin mining and what it really takes to become a full-sized, large-scale Bitcoin miner. Michael is an educator. He's been in the space for a long time. He has a lot of background with different strategies and techniques in the Bitcoin mining industry. We're going to get into it. I really want to find out whether he's done some large scale immersion mining, hydro mining, those kinds of things. We know that he's an air cooled miner for the most part. And I think he said previously they've got 20 megawatts split between different places. So he's got quite a bit of machines running and he knows his stuff. So I'm really excited to talk with him. And Will is actually the one that helped us get this interview today. So, Will, thank you so much for helping to set this up today. I'm super excited and I think we should just get right into it.
Sounds good to me.
All right, let's bring him up. Michael, welcome to the podcast.
Hey, thanks, guys. Thanks for having me.
We're happy to have you. So we just like to give you, a couple of minutes. Please just, describe to our listeners who you are, how you got into Bitcoin mining, what is Bitsbetrippin?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, so back in the early days of Bitcoin mining, so we're talking 2010, I discovered Bitcoin, and I used to do something called folding at home and SETI at home. So it was something that you could use computation cycles for, search for extraterrestrial, and then like folding at home is like doing protein folding. And on these forums that you'd have like on Reddit at the time, and there was a few other 4chan, there was a couple of other different channels that talked about, computational stuff like that. Some folks started sharing things about Bitcoin. This is like early 2010. And it was essentially at the crossroads when you could go from CPU mining Bitcoin to GPU mining. So when the very first sets of essentially doing GPU mining came out, like I caught on to it there. So it was like just one of those things where you find out this thing exists and you try it out. And at that time it was still in kind of a CLI, so it was like on command line at the time. So trying to get that compiled and get it working, get a node local, and you essentially would mine to that node. There weren't pools necessarily at the beginning like that, so you didn't know if it was really working, like if you weren't familiar with it, and then you would see like a payout showing like, hey, you earned 50 Bitcoin. So and it was in your wallet. You just do a command to see how much was in your wallet the next morning. And that kind of was like, it wasn't worth anything. Nobody was really even talking about price discovery yet or anything like that. It was more of like, does this mechanically work or not? Can you send and receive? Does it compile correctly, or around like the GPU use? And so it was kind of like a discovery through that point, right? And trying multiple PCs, of course, doing the folding at home and stuff. I had like a total nerd basement with lots of different PCs in there. And at the time I was responsible for a development team, and like every Wednesday we do like Wednesday game night. So I hosted all these PCs and people would come over, and it was a way for me to get to know the team very well and just make sure we worked great as a team, play, Halo and a couple other things on the computer. And at night I would kick off those miners and have them running all on their own local, so they were just mining direct to just the local PC, not pooled or anything. And then as pools came out, like right when Slush Pool came out, a registered account, got all the miners pooling to that. And on our Twitter, our X post, I show kind of like an email we got from them from, you're an OG when in 2012, I got an email saying that my account was going to be disabled for not using it for a year. So it's showing kind of like just how early we were at the time in this space. So by 2013, so from 2010 to essentially 2013, I was just self-mining, learning more, talking on the, Bitcoin Talk at the time was kind of a center point of communication related to Bitcoin content. And, I have a lot of posts out there from those times. And, there wasn't, if you were trying to troubleshoot something, there was just a couple avenues that you could make a post and then people would tell you how dumb you are. This is the internet. But sometimes you'd have people that were helping, right? Some people were helping, right? But it was like, there's no like, content. There was no like call it influencer, call it whatever. There was nothing on YouTube. There's a couple of people talking about it. I think Stefan and a few others, Antonopoulos was out there, doing meetups and stuff in the, that 2013 timeframe, 2012. But there was no direct content on the mining aspect of it, more than you had to go to the internet and look like a couple different wiki pages to see settings and that kind of stuff. So I was like, why not just make a YouTube channel on this? I mean, just fell fast. I mean, I'm a software developer and leading development teams at that time. And I was like, you know what, we can treat this like an agile project. I'm not a YouTuber, I don't know, but let's give it a whirl. And we came up with kind of a funny name, and it really kind of stemmed from the fact that we trip circuits a lot. Like you would trip your 20 amps and, like Bitcoin. So it's like Bitsbetrippin. So we're like, let's just, let's go with it. It's a funny name. It's catchy. It's people are not going to forget it type of thing once you hear it. And in 2013, we made Bitsbetrippin and really focused it around GPU mining at scale. I wouldn't say scale, but at the time you were going from essentially 2 GPUs, like in Crossfire, the AMD GPUs were the best at the time. And you had a couple other networks pop up during that, 2012 into 2013 range. There was Litecoin came out, and then Dogecoin and a couple other things, but like we wanted to show people, hey, you could scale things to like 6 GPUs and have more compute. And you had folks using milk cartons and stuff. So Brian, which was one of, a person that was helping me for a minute, he's an engineer. So he was like designing like open air rigs at the time. Right. So we showed one of our first few videos was showing people how to get them out of the milk cartons, because it's not a really good environment from airflow standpoint, and made this like 6-card rig, which I don't know if we have necessarily invented it, but like Brian came up with the design, and we showed this in like early 2013, that kind of traditional, what you would see an open air rig is. And we made a video of it was just the construction of that, like in a time lapse. So it was like, here's all the pieces you need. Here's all the components. You pay $20 and build this rig. And then that kind of stemmed, like people were like, hey, we need content like this. And then,
hey, like, Michael, I'm gonna pause you real quick, just because.
Yep. Good.
Yeah, we're good. So we lost a feed for a second. We're back now. Go ahead, Michael.
We're talking about GPU, 6-card GPU rigs, I believe, at the time. Yeah. So, I mean, that's really, I think in summary, that the fact of not having just a good like video, there's a video does a lot for people, especially if they're not like highly technical and come from like that kind of, like building machines and configuring things. And sometimes even like if you have like the settings typed out in like, let's say a wiki, like this was in early Bitcoin days, on how to configure a miner, like you would look at that and be like, I don't even know where to put that. And syntax means things, especially when you're talking about like things that don't have like error correction or anything. So like you could have a space in it and not work and spend hours. And that's really kind of what drove us to like, let's make the content. Let's show people in real time, even if we're failing, right? Like let's put the camera on, let's run a, if it's a live stream, if it's something, and just go through that activity of discovery and then fixing it. And it's okay. And not everybody, some people want the like quick, like give me the 30-second, especially now these days. I think a lot of the TikTok world kind of moved people to that. But like back in the day, it was like, I want something cradle to grave on starting a build to a finish. And then people would watch that. People would spend 4 hours and watch that. And it really kind of taught people in those 4 hours. And if you think of like any kind of like educational thing in general, if you can learn an entire, you could go in and I always made the claim that you could get lost in one of our videos from just finding it on the internet. And then by the end of the night, you're mining Bitcoin. And like, that was kind of the goal. It was like, you don't have to know how to do this and have no technical ability for it. And if I made the video in such a way that was like taking that into consideration, that was valuable for people, because we saw the value proposition that yes, we are competing in a way, if you think about it, like if more people get on, but the network adjusts accordingly. And if you have a strong security layer, then that's going to give out the counterparties confidence in investing into services or buying the coin because they don't want to set up a miner or deal with that. So I look at it like the more folks that were mining, the strength of that network. And that was back then. I mean, those are the words said in 2013, right? So it was like that was kind of the driver of us to get there, and sharing it online, and then going like crowdsourcing the information, because I didn't know what I didn't know. I only knew with what our experience was, and I know that there was a huge gap in other things that we could learn. And I always tell that to people starting anything on the internet, like, don't be afraid to start it, just do it. And you'll get through and you'll learn a lot in the process. And the internet's unforgiving. They'll tell you how many bad ways you've done it or whatever, but like the noise signal kind of ratio is that, like, if you get a lot of positive out of it, you're like, hey, whatever, like, I know noise is come with this, and just go with it. You know what I mean? So yeah, we started doing that. I think we're over 900 plus videos on YouTube.
That's amazing.
We're at close to 22,000 hours of content, because there's a lot of 4-hour videos in there.
22,000 hours. Wow.
Yeah, it's a lot. And so between that and Twitch, because we would do like 8-hour, like kick it on, go through like during like a halving event. We've done several of the halving events. And start it like a couple hours before, and then a couple hours after it, and in between it, you're just filling kind of the gap of just some pre-knowledge, or what could happen, price speculation, all these different things, right? You can really fill the time, when you're doing those videos. So it's yeah, I mean, it's kind of switched, over the years from mind you, we're pro proof of work in general, like, so like as other networks were coming up, I know there's a lot of Bitcoin maximalism and like people that just focus Bitcoin, and that's fine. I was looking at it more of like, there's a very diverse world out there, and people are going to have different ideas, and you can't really influence that much on Bitcoin from a development standpoint, more than just like bug fixes on a soft fork kind of frame. You're not going to hard fork Bitcoin. You're going to get another coin out of it from doing that, essentially. So how does innovation occur like in the space in general? And I think that comes through some of the other tokens that come out, like people trying and maybe failing on certain things, like proof of space and time. If you're talking like something like Chi to, distributed proof of work in a way with like a hybrid model, with trying like something like with Darkcoin that turned to Dash, and then Dash into hyper, the hybrid kind of model where you had
was that called
node operators.
Is that right?
Which one?
What?
Yeah, well, they it was X11. So all the different algorithms, so there's a range of the different algorithms, a range of the different styles of consensus, all of those things that emerged from proof of work, through all the channel through all the years. We were mining Bitcoin. We tried all kinds of different ASICs when it switched to ASICs. The Butterfly Labs stuff. I mean, we have videos on that. We have the KNC miners, all the iterations. Of trying to buy it. I mean, hell, we tried to buy 2 KNC Titans, never showed up. And I think they were like 10. I have the receipt from like 10.25 Bitcoin each.
Yeah.
And I remember sending like 20 Bitcoin for these things, and we never got them. So it was like, well, there's 20 Bitcoin gone, and I mean, at the time, I think it was closer to like $5 to $6 grand, maybe 10 grand. It was somewhere around there per machine. But like, the first day Newegg accepted Bitcoin, we went out there and bought 6 GPUs. They were like 3.25 Bitcoin each.
I remember that.
And, yeah, I was like, oh my God, Newegg, we could buy computer parts with it. And it was like, doing the, just the usage of the coin. You had the, company accepting Bitcoin. It was just like novel. And I go back and sometimes
flood those websites and try to, the community would definitely like have one day where they buy a lot of stuff, and then it would pretty much run out of style pretty quick. People didn't want to spend even back then.
Yeah, there was good deals and stuff. But yeah, I mean, it was just like, it was so, I don't know. It's like, it was like, there was no like things. It was like innocent, right? It was like, oh, this is awesome. Let's go do this. It was very mechanically, set up to where it was just like, you wanted to try all these new things that you could do with the Bitcoin.
Yeah.
and I don't know, like those old days, I'm always nostalgic, right? When you go back and think about it, but we usually get a lot of questions like, "Are you bummed that you spent $500,000, $800,000 on a GPU rig?" And I'm like, at the time, no. I mean, now, yeah, it's fine, but we were in it early enough that we were able to take some of that capital and deploy it to bigger things and stuff. But like it, I wouldn't change any of it just because I mean it's kind of what made us like drive further into some of the stuff. But we were lucky enough to find the I was lucky enough to find the right hobby at the right time, type of thing with this, and just continue it and try to educate people more and learn from it. And yeah, I mean, that's really kind of like, I know that's a long way of like, who's BBT, but I mean, that's really what we were. I mean, try to make a YouTube channel, educate people on it. I mean, most of the stuff that we have, if anybody watches any of our stuff, I'm just trying to do observe and report. Like, here's what we're doing. It's not necessarily the way, it's a way to do
that's
it.
So valuable. I mean, like I remember those days and trying to just absorb. I came from a non-technical background, I just wanted to learn everything I could. And there's just not many resources back then. Very, some obscure forum posts, like you said, some wikis out there, and nothing else really. There weren't many videos. So that's kind of what I started to do as well. I just started making videos or joining other YouTube channels and creating content, mostly discussing the news and current events and developments around Bitcoin from a high level. But again, like, as you want to touch this stuff, you want to use this stuff, you need video content, especially, but any form of digital content to learn about this stuff. I mean, I started looking in weird places like Xbox live chats just to find, I found Bitcoiners there, and I was like, wait, can we be friends? Hold on, let's stay in the lobby and just talk about Bitcoin. And like, and then that would translate into kind of a little chat room, using gosh, I don't know, probably ICQ or something back then. And, just to learn, like, I was asking the noobiest, dumbest questions because I was trying to absorb everything, and there just weren't instructional videos. And I did come across some of your videos in those early days. Like, I think I recall the video where you guys are building the GPU rig inside milk crates. And that was, I was like, I didn't have funds at the time to invest in the hardware to do it, but I was so enamored with it and I wanted to participate so bad. And so now, of course, even back then, people were like, there's too many podcasts, there's too many YouTube channels, there's too many blogs. And it was like, no, there's not. And even to this day, I take that side of that debate that, there's still not enough content creation going on. And there's plenty, there's a blue sky for anyone who wants to create content and talk about different things to get people started. That's what we want to do. And we, we want to provide some instructional videos with the current stuff, piggyback off of the work that pioneers like you have done and still do. And so, there's always a need for education.
It's wild to me because, you guys come from a completely different generation of Bitcoiners than me. I mean, just getting into the space recently, when I started diving down the road or the whole of Bitcoin, it's like, okay, well, who do I go to? I started with Preston Pish, and then you kind of make your way through the instructional videos of Ben Sessions and Guy Swan and all these different things. It's kind of like a lot easier for Bitcoiners now to really find that content. But I completely agree with you guys that there's, well, at least with Will, I'm not sure how you feel, but I'm pretty sure you would feel this way, that there's just not enough Bitcoin content out there and not enough signal through the noise, because I do feel like a lot of Bitcoin content is just kind of getting into crypto tokens and shit coins and stuff like that. And I am a little bit of a toxic maximalist. Anytime someone comes to me with this coin idea or a token, I'm just like, I don't have the time for that. And, to each his own. Everybody can go do what they want. This is not financial advice, but what I don't care about spending time in any other cryptocurrency. I'm like, it's Bitcoin and it's Bitcoin only. So what can I learn? And diving into the YouTube channels and the Twitter spaces and all these different things, it's like there is so much content that you can absorb. I think I went from, having a bunch of different types of YouTubes that I've watched or podcasts. Now it's all Bitcoin. All I do is Bitcoin and learn as much as possible. And that kind of like led me down this road of like, well, what is missing in the space, and not necessarily missing, but needs more. And it was Bitcoin mining. Like Bitcoin mining is this great way to not only make a profit, I mean, because you can make profit off of these things if you do it properly, but also like it's a fun thing to play with. I mean, you get to mess with computers, you get to toy around with this stuff. You know, I'm messing around with and I just ordered it. So an EPIC board with a Nord Cloudline inline fan configuration and a Loki board. So I'm going to go from 220 down to 120 and just mess around with a single hash board. I mean, I never thought about that kind of stuff before, but it's out there and you can find it. And so it seems different than the days of when you guys were getting into it back when, you know, you had to go search
USB miners and
yeah.
Like,
what are they called? The block eruptors? The block eruptors being plugged into these, you know, USB, like power strips.
Yeah, they're just mini chips. I mean, they were it was kind of the hope and the dream, right? And a few people have been lucky and hit a block, you know, on those, you know, where they're using like 4 watts. You know, it seems improbable, but like highly improbable, but it happens. I mean, people you know, have been successful on, you know, just learning and trying something small. And I mean, part of it's like, it's kind of, where do you want to go? There's levels, right? There's people that want to go way deep and just learn as much as they can. And I always like crawl, walk, run strategy with that. You know, start with a little 4 watt miner that's a USB and understand what's going on mechanically. And then you're like, okay, now I'm going to scale this up to maybe the 120, you know, because you can do it at your house and it's less eventful, you know, from a noise standpoint and all that. And then you can start to scale it up a little more and just be part of that, you know, maybe to a single unit, because you're probably gonna be paying like 12-18 cents, you know, depending where you're at in the country, you know, for power. So, you know, you're probably not gonna pull a lot of profit or anything like that. You're just mining fresh Bitcoin, you know, first position type of thing, you know, from the pool. But, you know, that initial kind of like grungy, and you look at the profit margins back then, I mean, there was next to nothing. It was more of like we were doing it for the art and the fun of it and learning this new nascent technology, you know, when it comes to the just big blockchain tech in general, and what is it and how does this thing work and what's the value proposition, that kind of stuff. And then with Bitcoin being, you know, the hardest money that you can have, like, you know, it really solidified that use case and that value proposition, you know, more than, you know, as people started to branch off, like, well, I want to use this messaging interface to do these other things. You know, people are going to do, it's like clay. People are going to move things certain ways that make sense to them and build, you know, maybe with false expectations that they're going to get, you know, very wealthy for building this ancillary thing off of it. And then some people still gravitate just to what it is, right? What Bitcoin is and being part of that. But, you know, I've always stuck kind of more to the mining because it's just so, it's like the infrastructure layer 1 kind of like, not a lot of, it's permissionless. I can just literally go find power and plug it in, you know, like it's, I don't have to ask for acceptance from the internet. It's kind of like I'm just doing it and it shows up and Bitcoin shows up. So that is very liberating kind of when you're doing that. And
I think
mining,
when people come across Bitcoin and then, you know, second or third question they want to understand really is what is mining? How does it work? Because that's kind of at the heart of, is this thing real and actually useful or not? And so then, you know, it has all these traits, right? Permissionlessness and censorship resistance and things like that. And people start to wrestle with those concepts and, you know, how real are those concepts and does Bitcoin actually achieve them? But when you actually kind of engage with mining and directly kind of touch the network yourself with your own hands as a miner or even just running a node at this point, you actually come to that realization you just described, which is, I don't need anything but access to power and the internet. And then I'm part of it. I'm part of the network. I didn't have to ask anybody, you know, and that is, I think, a moment when a lot of light bulbs go off, or that is also the moment where the learning curve of understanding the nature of Bitcoin, what it is, really kind of hits that elbow, hits the hockey stick point. And And I think that's really powerful, which brings us back to like this education idea, right? So you've been an educator for a very long time. I was an educator for a very long time. Where do you think the biggest education gaps are today, whether it's mining or just Bitcoin understanding as a whole? What do we as educators or aspiring content creators and educators need to do to kind of where's the gaps and what do we need to do to fill them?
I think the one is still one of the largest ones, and I mean, even we experience this every day, like when we're transferring stuff, is really having a comfortability level with the transaction, the wallet, the seed keys, where do you store it, those kind of elements that are, transient to the whole architecture, and there's still like a comfort level. Like some folks are like, hey, I just want to be a counterparty. I want to buy it. Where do I store it? Oh, I'm going to store my own keys. Well, how's that work? We get this Ledger or Trezor device that's, and you kind of explain that process to them. And then it's foreign and they're scared. And they're like, wait a minute, if I lose this, it's gone. So there's this gap, I think still, even today, 12, 13 years later, on just understanding how public key cryptography and the ability to store and retrieve your coins from the network, and that concept that, you actually don't have them. You just have a key to access them on a network, right? And you lose that key, it's gone. And there's been efforts, from the, 12 word seeds, that kind of thing, to help you kind of restore that. But then there's that security gap. So I think there's still some great potential in kind of solving that in a way
dude,
that helps.
I think you're dead on with that, because like everything old is new again in Bitcoin at this time of the cycle, right? Like that's the thing that I really dove into as a non-technical person, becoming a digital native, if you will. I'm a quick learner, and I am also good at reading people and understanding groups of people. And so I realized early on in 2013 and 14, when I was running meetups, this is the thing that's going to hold people back. And if we can get people over this big hump of understanding how to self-manage digital secrets, these keys that are tangible material, right? Using data storage devices and even just pencil and paper. And so we did a lot of little exercises in the meetup to kind of get people comfortable with this stuff. I made many long videos about public-private key cryptography, key management, even just things that don't directly relate to Bitcoin, but support Bitcoin, like using password managers, how to set up two-factor authentication, understanding what it is and why it's worth using, and then getting people to buy into changing their behavior. Instead of like, oh, I've got a password I memorize and I change one character at the end or whatever, just to vary it up, depending, because each site demands a different sort of complexity level of the password format. So, and I mean, these create so many problems, and that's what people got used to, like 25 years of being on the internet. And so back then we're needing to teach people about this stuff just to get them to adopt Bitcoin. And nowadays, we're needing to teach them about this stuff still, because they need to protect themselves from scammers, or they need to understand the importance of self-custody when, there's so many easy custodial solutions out there that basically allow people to rely on the habits that they're used to, right? We still need to teach people to change these behaviors and become more secure on the internet. And so I completely agree with that. It's like, man, I didn't succeed in that job of educating people on this stuff because it's still a problem 10 years later.
Yeah.
But,
and I think that's an opportunity for developers. Yep.
Yeah. Sorry. I was just curious. When do you see that being accomplished? Like how much longer is it going to take for people to kind of get those habits?
Yeah, I think it comes down. I look at it like I put the developer hat on and I look at kind of how the fabric of like, above, I look at it from like you have machine code, you have your C, you have like your interpreted languages, and now you're kind of starting to getting a better fabric, like to where people are now learning like full stack development more. It's kind of around that. You have AI assistants and stuff. So now you can get a little more boutique of options. And I think that as that part matures a little more, that we'll start to get a little more, maybe layer and development in UI and recovery. I always liked like the CASA option where you have maybe a independent third party that has a key set, and that you can start to kind of get in these, consortiums like on large Bitcoin setups to where, you have a protection. Because I mean, like as a single individual, part of the issue, and we've had to help, like people reach out, they don't know, like I've made a couple of videos on how to like record or restore or sweep a key to like Exodus and that kind of thing. Like if you're like had an old Bitcoin wallet and you're trying to restore it from just the straight key itself versus like having seed words or any of that. And I've made a couple of those, and on those videos people then find our contact information and then reach out and say, hey, I had a family member, not too long ago that had reached out and said, hey, so and so had passed, they were into Bitcoin, we have all this stuff we don't know what to do with. And I'm like, okay, first off, don't start sharing that and don't take pictures of it, like just that part, right? So it's like you have like attrition with like human, like people pass and they maybe be in it and then the family has no idea. So like there's services that are there for that kind of stuff, and that's like a true like trust. Like I don't think there's an easy answer short of maybe more established services that are made to help with that kind of stuff. And as you got more proliferation of content and people taking crypto off the exchanges and holding it, you're going to have this amount of problems across how many people are holding them custodially if something happens to them and that kind of stuff. So there's like there is a thread out there. There's an open opportunity for anybody listening to this podcast that there might be an opportunity to kind of build that kind of strength and structure. The problem is there's so many scammers that are trying to do it too, right? So it's like trying to find that aspect of it. When you do a self-custodial of anything like that, you always have that kind of tangential risk to it. But, I think that, and then obviously some of the frameworks that are now getting in place, obviously the crypto bill was vetoed, the latest one, but like some of the components of that allow for certain institutions to help folks with it. And I mean, I think people do their own research, and if you're comfortable with bringing it in internally and you build your own processes, the best thing any of us creators can do is give them a set of options, kind of like analysis of alternatives, saying here's how you can store it in this, have a password manager, have this, have at least one other person that knows it, that kind of behavior, and maybe kind of sets up a framework. There's a lot of stuff that we've done over time, like Bitcoin's always been kind of the side business. Now it's kind of like my primary thing. But in my other life, I've been a solution architect, developer, and part of that gets me into like standards committees. Like I go out to Georgetown. I went out to Georgetown University in DC a couple times and talked crypto to students there. And it's around trying to make sure that they understand on how to answer this kind of problem, from a development standpoint, and to come into the space and look at all of the different fringe opportunities that are supporting this infrastructure, from if it's policy, if it's rule writing for the behavior of like how institutions should work with it, that kind of stuff too, to help kind of there is a cypherpunk element that's always going to be there, and that's good. It should stay there, right? But there's also going to be a whole bunch of other folks that want to interact and have that freedom to be able to take something off an exchange, but then they need to do it without losing it, right? So I think there's a huge opportunity across the board to help those folks.
I think that kind of double-sided approach to education is super important, and I think people get very ideologically driven in one direction or the other, maybe too much, right? Like we need a group of people who are educating the masses, the grandmothers, the aunties and uncles, how to do self-custody, how to use Bitcoin in accordance with its cypherpunk roots and principles. And then we also need a group of people who are aggressively, appealing to, corporations, governments, various institutions, to show them the promises that Bitcoin can appeal to them with, and then getting them on board. And, that just speeds up the game theory, in my opinion, of Bitcoin mass adoption. And again, the more people, I think, that get onboarded with Bitcoin, the more groups and people, institutions, that the faster we get to that future that we want. Because again, Bitcoin is a tool, anyone can use it. The more people that use it, it does kind of change the psychology, whether a group or institution or just an individual. It changes how you think about things, and I think for the better, right? On both sides. Let's shift back to mining, if you don't mind. I'm curious, with your deep perspective and history in the space, can you talk about kind of what was the darkest or toughest time, or the most problematic period for Bitcoin miners that you endured? And then maybe talk about what we're facing today and the unique challenges of today.
Yeah, I would think so. The initial transition from off of GPUs into ASICs was hitting a realm of the scary part about that at that moment in time was really around, like, is this going to be, is the security stack going to be co-opted by like a single company or a couple companies? Because you had this, the thing about GPU mining, and it's always been, I would say, the strongest suit of opportunity to include a lot of random people around the whole world, because GPUs are so readily available. I mean, CPUs arguably would be even better, but we all know that just computationally, it makes more sense to kind of go to that ancillary device. It's when that started to transition, there was a lot of talk amongst everybody. It's like, wait a minute here. So I'm going to have something that's going to, 10, 15, 20 times faster, and only one company makes it. You had Butterfly Labs, you had Avalon A1, you had the first, but it was very like kind of done because of like game theory in general, it was kind of done in secret. And then they kind of was like, well, we can make a retail version of this, but then how many people were doing it? How many people had access? That was the first kind of, like, I would say, scare. I was like, wait a minute here. Like, everything we're kind of working for might be co-opted by a couple companies. They will control the supply chain. So competition was a big piece there. But it kind of, I think the way it kind of started to shake out was because it was open, it gave really anybody with any sort of means to kind of come together as a group and try to make another company, right? And go after this. Like, it's a fair market opportunity, right? It's like the core of capitalism. And you really think about it, is anybody can go and participate. It's fair market competition. If you get some of the smartest folks on your team and you can work through problems and you work together as a good team, you might end up with a product that's competing with another product. So then we ended up having a handful of machines, that came out, from KNC, Spondulis, all these different companies that came out to start making hardware. And I think it kind of brought everything up to like, okay, there's going to be a range of options here. But it's still, I mean, the A6 is arguably still mainly controlled by a handful of companies, right? And that's still part of like the risk. And I mean, just with the situation right now going on with like Taiwan and all that, like, well, that shut down global production for a little bit, and so we'll have a flattening of kind of like a surge of any of the new chips coming out. So I mean, you still have like that kind of
Can
risk.
we talk about that a little bit more? Yep. That is something I don't think we talk about enough. I mean, we point it out as a problem, and it's not dismissed, but it's not talked about. So, so yeah, there's a real threat that, something may happen with Taiwan where, maybe China comes in and they kind of stop the exportation of a lot of this hardware, or they keep it for themselves or something like that. And like you said, the obvious effect would be kind of a flattening of innovation on chip development, which would
just supply in general. Like, right. Yeah. I mean, a lot of the, I mean, there's stuff in Malaysia. There's other foundries, right? Yep. I mean, I was just out in Arizona, at a company that was actually rebuilding a new data center on semiconductor. They make chips too. So like, there's other fabrication and semiconductor companies, but like everybody's almost maxed out right now. Like, that's why you see like the AI ML stuff with data centers using a lot more power. You have the semiconductor companies out there, but a majority of those, that fine fabrication, you're talking 3 nanometer architecture, that stuff coming out of Taiwan. If there is a disruption in the East in general, like there's kind of kill plans on the plants themselves, like if something does happen, because they don't want it to fall in.
Talk about what that is a little bit
hands.
more. I think
so. Essentially, if they're invaded, I mean, so essentially, TSMC and some of the larger foundries came out and said, "Here's the deal: if it's done forcefully, not through some kind of like agreement, like if I think the way this is going to go down is a couple ways. I think one, China's going to do something. They want to reincorporate. So it's either going to go one or two ways. They're going to do like a Hong Kong thing where it's like it's a handoff and it's an agreement. Maybe it takes 5 years and they do like a 2 government policy and it just gets incorporated. I think in that scenario, TSMC and everybody is at the table. The large companies there come to the table and say, okay, here's how this is going to work. And then it takes like a 5-year runoff to happen, or it comes in militarily, which could go many scenarios. Does the U.S. help? Does the U.S. not? But they have kill plans on those plants, and that's part of the poison pill they put out back to China, saying, hey, if you're coming here because there's semiconductors and you want control of that, we're just going to blow the plant. So like, you're not going to get this. You're going to get a hole.
Describe what a kill plan or a particular kill plan. Maybe you've heard of some proposed or something. Describe what that looks like.
It's so the fabrication machines, there's only one company in the world that actually makes those. I think they're out of Finland, and essentially they have a way to disable it and they'll just destroy the foundry essentially.
So they basically brick the machine that fabricates the boards and chips.
Yeah, it's like a kill switch, like if you had like trying to get access to something from somebody and you're like, hey, if you take me out, you don't get access to that. This is the same kind of thing. So they'll just disable the foundries, and that's bad in a whole bunch of ways, right? I mean, so if you play the scenario out there, it's like if China does take it over, at least you'll still get chips out of it, right? So it's kind of like from a, maybe there's a tax, maybe there's tariffs because of the action, whatever, it makes prices go up. But if you kill the capability, how far does that step you back? Because there's only so many of those foundries around. They take years to make, up to 36 months to deploy a new foundry, if not more, up to 5 years. That's, at the pace of what that one company that can make those, because they have the patents and they know how to do all the fabrication side of it. The Intel and Samsung sites that are in the US, I don't think are due until like 27, 28. So, I mean, now you're talking about taking all chip manufacturing, like the core chip manufacturing at like 3 nanometer and the higher end stuff, 5 nanometer stuff from AMD, and just pausing it, right, worldwide, right? So everything's going to skyrocket. We kind of felt some of that with like COVID type of thing, when like none of the chip manufacturers are really printing anything, and then it just is a rolling wave on the supply chain side,
right?
So it just takes a while for all that to come back to fruition. Now, there was other things with COVID where like they weren't letting boats into ports and stuff because of like 6 foot distancing, all that other stuff. But like,
which we just found out
would have a dramatic effect. Yeah, it would have definitely a dramatic effect on it. And so for like Bitcoin mining, rolling it all the way back to like Bitcoin mining, essentially all the pre-orders. I mean, if you think all the publicly traded companies, we're like in a transition right now. So the Bitcoin mining space right now, by and large, across everywhere, is moving from the S19s to the S21s. If you're looking at Bitmain architecture, if you're looking at what's Miner doing the M60s, and you're looking at some of the other ones like Auradine. We're looking at some of the new Auradine machines are going from the AT 1500 to the 2880s. All those chips are being made over there, right? So if that production stops or is halted, then everybody's going to be looking at spare part fixing, just you'll have a slow decline on the hash rate as things start to fall off. You also have stuff like today, Core announced CoreWeave is making a position to buy Core Scientific, and then they're going to repurpose the 200 megawatts on the East Coast to just AI mining. So they're going to get out of a portion of Bitcoin mining with Core Scientific. So essentially, because they're in their transition period, right? They have a whole bunch of S19s, they have a whole bunch of other hardware that's that's moving over to the 5 and 4 nanometer stuff. And instead of doing that and spending a lot of money on new hardware, maybe pausing those orders or backing out, they're just going to transition to AI ML, because the essentially cost per megawatt that you gain from that is almost 2.5 times now than what you would earn from Bitcoin mining right now post halving.
Yeah.
Right. So now that's not potential, right? If Bitcoin goes to 200K, math changes a little, but yeah. So, I mean, I think there's a few things in float right now with that from a risk standpoint. Now, does that impact in Bitcoin's network? Not necessarily. I mean, we have a ton of miners around the world, all have hardware. The current network's at, 500 or so exahash. The network will continue to go on. Current hash price will be the same if prices are the same type of thing. So, it'll just slowly degrade if we don't get a replenishment of chips.
I want to talk about some of the knock-on effects of a situation like we're hypothetically describing with the Taiwan thing for the Bitcoin network specifically, but just back to the foundry situation, obviously it's a very intensive, very complex process. It's why there's only a few places in the world where this work is done. But why does it take so long to spin up a new foundry? Is it regulatory hurdles and friction, or is it just the incredibly intensive specialized work? I mean, 3 to 5 years is, really long time. And you'd think in places with a lot of encouragement for, jurisdictions that encourage this type of innovation, it could accelerate that timeline quite a bit, but it doesn't seem like that's the case. No matter where you want to build a foundry, it's going to take, a handful of years at least. Can you talk a little bit about, from a high level, why that is and what the impediments are there? And then we'll get into the knock-on effects of, how that shutdown or capture might affect the network, the Bitcoin network.
Yeah. So so if you think of any major large project from substations through parts, construction, permitting, zoning, and let's say all that's a rubber stamp. Let's say the area that it's going into is highly motivated. The skids or grease, as you would call it, meaning like the local politics, the government. Let's say you're putting one in Washington State or something, and everybody's for it. And everybody's like, just rubber stamp, rubber stamp, rubber stamp. That stuff will go pretty quick. The red tape stuff, it's literally the machinery and the tooling. So if you're talking about a brand new foundry, they're going to put the latest tech. So it's all like think of it like a Gantt schedule. The stuff that's going to get set up in there from a tooling standpoint is literally going to be the edge of where the tech is at. And they're probably forecasting it. So like the stuff that's going to go for Intel and Samsung is going to be around that 2 nanometer range. It doesn't exist. I mean, it's theoretical, but it's not there. But that's what'll be tooled there. So you're looking at the blueprints of what that company in, I think it's Finland or Norway, that builds the piece of hardware. That's on their roadmap. So they may be still 12 months to 18 months out from even getting it to where they can build it, and then they got to construct it. And it's like a big printer. There's a large, robotic process. It's a robotic process automation machine that they go in and do that stuff with. You have clean rooms, and then you got to get personnel that live there and then to get them trained up. And that takes time too, because it's like bleeding edge tech. So you take all these different elements and the project scheduler that's handling that, and then trying to move certain things left and right, depending on when things are available to build it. It's just a matter of time of constructing it. It's the same thing with some of these larger data centers. Was literally out in Arizona 3 weeks ago, and there's a couple different data centers getting torn down right now. There one that was 22 megawatt, and essentially the requirement now for AI ML, and it'll take it all the way down to just a server rack. So if you think of a 42U server rack, standard size, 72-inch high, may have 30 machines in it, or 24 machine, 24U worth of blade servers, and then maybe some redundant power and all that. That whole thing typically would be like 6,000 watts, right? It would have a 30 to a 50 amp breaker going into it with the PDU. One of those HGXs, the AI ML, which is like a 4U box with 8 GPUs in it. Each of those GPUs may use up to 2,200 watts each. So now you're talking 12,000, 13,000 watts of power coming out of that single unit, where that whole rack maybe only had 6, and you're going to put 3 of those in there. So now you're talking, you need a damn near 100,000 watts for that one rack, and you're going to put a whole server room of them. So you're 10xing your power requirement. So that's the real big shock to the system, is that these data centers were not designed for a 200 megawatt, some large, I mean, if you're talking like large availability zone or edge cluster for like Azure or AWS or any of them, that's an actual data center, they may use 500 megawatt, half a gig a watt, but like a full size data center may use 2 gigawatts by itself. So not 0.5. So you're looking at large increases of power requirement. So then they got to tear everything down. And this place that we were out there, they literally were tearing the whole 60 building campus down to the ground and rebuilding it. And they're like, yeah, this will be ready in 29. So it's like, well, holy crap. So it's taken them 2 years to tear it all down, remove everything. They have a standby location that they're renting, from another company, why they build their own. So it's just the construction, the permitting, you're talking a building size of 60 buildings with different components. And they just don't, when they build these data centers in the campuses, they just don't centralize it into one location for all kinds of obvious reasons, right? It's a campus, and you don't know where certain things are for obvious reasons, for just security standpoint. So you don't know if the core cluster's here. You can kind of trace it from the internet, like you see where the power is going, but a lot of that stuff's underground. They're built a lot of that stuff underground. So you have a big substation to the side, and you don't know what building does what, right? So there's just a lot of planning in that, trying to figure out with engineers. And then you look at the envelope of that, it's like a 12 to 18 month planning process, get everything arranged. And then the construction may take 12 months. And even if that's sometimes running 2 shifts, if you go a full 3 shift, you're talking 5 people for one job, right? And that kind of thing, with giving people vacations and stuff. So people are like, I'll just go 24/7. Well, it's a 5-to-1 ratio on 24/7, not 3-to-1. So it's just exponentially more expensive to do overnight, that kind of thing. So now and everybody has to be equally like that. Now it's interesting because like people like SpaceX does amazingly huge things really quick, and they run, those 5-to-1 ratios to build those, the super heavy and all that kind of stuff. But they're building rockets, not like data centers. And I'd argue that the science to get you to space is pretty intense, handful of people. The science to build a whole bunch of chips for the world, whole bunch of really smart people in a big, large location with a lot of like edge technology. So like I think it's a force multiplier on several components that take it the time to over that scope. But that's what's interesting about and it probably is a good segue to move into like how quick we were able to get the Bitcoin mine up compared to like comparable. Like Bitcoin mining is like super easy compared to like that kind of stuff, right? I mean, the data center component of it would be our ASIC, right? That's where the tech is at. And then infrastructure's easy part.
Just to put a bow on this Taiwan story and chip foundry stuff, you started talking about some of the knock-on effects for the Bitcoin network itself might be this tapering decline in difficulty in the event of a capture or a kill plan type of scenario with these chip foundries. What else should people maybe consider or think about in terms of what the knock-on effects might be, and how that we saw the China mining ban, right? 50% hash rate reduction, very fast, very rebounded incredibly quickly as well, and that played a huge role in what I think was like a truncated cycle last time around in 21, end of 21. And so we've lived through these massive peaks and valleys in hash rate and rearrangement of the network physically around the world because of certain regulations and government actions. But this would create a different sort of looking situation, right? What else besides this kind of slowly tapering hash rate decline might we see in the event of one of these foundries going down?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think what it does is it really puts a halt on like all this like growth of the data center side in general, like in chips, cars, anything that's using, microprocessors in general that are taped out of TSMC, and the other foundries out there, right? I mean, it's because they can push to their edges, other, some of the plans, some of the, high priority stuff. If it's medical equipment, if it's things that are, I think you kind of divide it into what's essential and what's non-essential. Non-essential, maybe anything capitalistic in general, not just Bitcoin mining, but just things that are not like the end of the world type of stuff, but like medical devices, things that are MRI machines, anything that's required to keep society rolling will push to the edges of the other foundries, because they just need to make that happen. And then you might have like there are elements of like what they call MDCs, like mobile data centers, that can be put up pretty quickly, that are, like we're working right now to try to put up one right literally in flight, trying to put up this unit it's essentially 12 9 containers that smack together like to make like a small array. Cradle to grave on that's like less than 18 months, right? So as long as the containers and stuff have been kind of set up, you could flip a data center pretty quick. That footprint's only 10 meg, right? So you could get like a micro version of that kind of stuff operational. On the foundry side, you're kind of stuck on building, like, you need the big machine that does it, you need the clean rooms, you need the people, and the intelligence. And that's part of the thing is, like, I think that you would see an exodus. So like while the hardware's down, you would see the people that are part of that getting quick visas out somewhere else, right? And getting out of the country. They're going to be, one, obviously financially incentivized to do so, probably even more so, like, hey, I know that you're home, but like some stuff's going down. Let's let this get figured out. And then while you're there, we'll keep you and your family busy here, and maybe build another opportunity somewhere else. So I think the brain trust of that shifts with it. So, and then the hardware can be replaced, type of thing. So that's a key piece, is getting people safe and getting them, where they can maybe start that work somewhere else. But, it's all this tangential effect of just society in general, of all chips. And we've seen some of this. It's so weird that it played out with like COVID, but we got to kind of try before we buy type of issue. I think from there, not conspiracy, just it's interesting. A lot of those type of effects could happen. And we saw what happened, like across the markets in general, everything went up, and it wasn't just inflation driven. Literally, you couldn't get something. So supply demand drove it, not, some other effect. So I think from a supply demand standpoint, there's mechanically going to be a thing that happens with that. Once that occurs, you'll have the front running of it, like when it's imminent. And then, so if you see markets start to do stuff like way ahead of it, maybe it's speculatory, but maybe something happens. And then, I think that there'll be plans for folks to try to fire up other things as soon as possible. But we'll see an effect in general with like prices initially spiking on things that have chips in them, cars, that kind of stuff, because there just won't be the supply for them. I think that's the main effect for it.
That makes a lot of sense. And that brings us to like the incredible story of your recent build and how rapidly you were able to complete such a large scale project. So again, our podcast is geared towards people who are just getting interested in mining, or, even people who are very seasoned miners, right? But this whole question that we often wrestle with, and pretty much every episode, is, what does the future of mining look like? Is it more and more large conglomerations? Is it centralization of these large facilities more and more? Or is it, kind of more decentralized, more home miners, more hobby miners, more small and medium-sized businesses who attach mining to their existing non-Bitcoin business because it has some kind of symbiotic effect with their existing company? And so we wrestle with that question a lot, but love for you to go into the story of kind of this marvelous project that you've just completed. So share with us that.
Yeah. So the turnaround on this build, once we had, so there's stages to doing anything. And this particular one, we were doing it for a client. And, from just the initial conversation to the point of kicking off a project, that part was probably around 6 months of just going back and forth, some financial models, trying to figure out what things are going to cost. That part takes probably the most time, unless somebody's already pre-researched and they're ready, right? So they're like, hey, we've already done the math. We want to do this. So if you went with somebody that's just kind of on the edge, but they don't have any models to try to figure out, what's hash rate going to look like, what's the price of machines, what's all this kind of stuff, that part can take a little bit of time. But let's say when you get to the point of like moving forward in execution, what we've done here is kind of pre-set up certain areas around around our area that have substations and capacity. We pre-did that with the power company, just saying, look at the whole entire field of what you have from a capability standpoint, and what are properties that are near substations or around, and are those properties for sale, or are they on the sub itself? Because we, folks that have been following us, 2 years ago, a little over 2 years ago now, we put a site on a substation. There was a huge substation. It was set up for original and an expansion. Something wasn't approved locally, like the factory was going to come in, so they had pre-built the size of it, but they only had a smaller capability there, so they had all this extra space on the substation that was all graveled and fenced in. And I was like, hey, that would be a great spot for me to put some containers. So we worked out this thing. It took about, I don't know, 5 or 6 months with the power company. I talked to their board. We worked through what pricing would look like and what the options are. And essentially those conversations come as, I need 4 cents or lower power. And then everybody laughs and says that's impossible, cost of production, all that kind of stuff. But then we get the actuaries involved and people start looking at the load factor. That's the key to it, is their pricing structures are made, even when you have businesses and stuff in these up and down cycles, right? Of they're open from this time to this time, factories running, and then it's off, for the off shifts, right? They're not using as much power. So then they have maybe a commercial 3-phase rate. Normal rates for people around here, anywhere from 12 to 14 cents per kilowatt all in. Commercials around 9 cents per kilowatt all in for 3-phase 480 as an example. We went there and said, hey, if we had a minimum load factor of 75%, meaning what you're feeding us, we're going to use 75% of an entire calendar year. That's taking in curtailments and some of the other stuff. That's the minimum. I got to meet that. And then our upper bound might be as high as 90%, 92%, somewhere around there, of a load factor. Well, so then they go back in and look at what their rate's based on, and then they can see that, hey, I'm buying power at 2 a.m. and I'm at full load factor at the time. That just changes the math a little. So what they have to do from a recapture to be whole, that number changes. So then they were able to get the energy rates down to around 3 cents. And then you start looking at NCP and CP rates, which are just components that come onto the bill, non-coincidental peak and coincidental peak. Those two, and then taxes and everything else that's in there, it rolls up to, in our area, around 4.1 cents all in, as long as you agree to be registered with, in our area, as MISO, which is they'll send out the alerts for curtailments and stuff. So that's a extremely competitive rate. And when you start talking about, smaller subs that could do 5 meg down to 1.5 meg, which this latest one was, you can start to involve now people from an all-in build standpoint. With as cheap as miners are right now, you're talking probably all in $500,000 to $600,000, everything. That's us building it. That's the containers. It's the miners. That's the gravel, the fencing, everything. That used to be higher than that, right? You were looking at 250 to 300K a megawatt was the normal cost to build without the miners, right? So now we're talking with the miners, you're at, far lower than 180 grand a megawatt. So that kind of changed the economics for folks to get in, if they come in as a group, right? And so we've had different clients that just an individual, they have a little bit of capital and they work with 5 or 6 other individuals, and then they'll form a company, and then they'll come call us, or companies like us that go and build stuff for them, and just try to add more folks to the network. And we've done enough of these now that we've gotten it pretty refined, especially in this area, that from a contractor, civil, permitting, all that kind of stuff, the local counties in our area, there's 4 counties around here, that have they know who we are, they know how we work, what we know, what they need from like certificate of insurability, bonds, all that kind of stuff. So now we've gotten it kind of locked in, and show them a template. So we went to another county. We're like, hey, here's all the things. What needs to change for you? And then just pre-grease that. So then when folks come in, we can quickly get them up. So we broke ground on this latest 1.5 meg site on May 13th. It was literally a grass field next to a substation, and we energized yesterday. So it was actually done, everything loaded and plugged in on June 1st. So, I mean, it was, gravel, piering with the piers, concrete, fencing, everything packed, transformer pad, all the wire pulled, electricians doing their piece, like all that stuff in a couple weeks. So we were lucky there wasn't a ton of rain. We didn't have any kind of impacts like that, but yeah, pretty well oiled.
That's
I'm
crazy.
Totally impressed. Go ahead, Trevor.
I was just gonna say, I mean, like I've never seen buildings or construction sites go up that quickly. So it just shows the drive that Bitcoiners have when trying to get their site up and running. So congratulations and good on you. That's incredible. So I got a couple of esoteric questions for you. The first one. So what is, you've been in the space for a very long time. You've been around the ringer probably more times than any of us can count. What is your best piece of advice for a new up and coming Bitcoiner who wants to get into Bitcoin mining but doesn't really know how to begin?
Yeah, just jump in and get a small, like cheap miner to understand on how the basics work. You could learn on a USB miner to a small older S9, something that isn't going to cost you a ton from your learning experience. Because you think of it like, if you go somewhere to learn and you pay a fee, essentially you're doing that for yourself with a piece of hardware, right? So understanding how it mechanically works and how like it connects to a pool and you start earning overnight, like as it's running, understanding the elements that come into maintenancing something like that. And then if you can go from that point to, do you expand with your local, house is, or do you work with another group that maybe is looking for just even partial investment? The risk is with that is like, who's the team and do they know what they're doing? And are their intentions right? Are they going to stick through the hard stuff? I mean, we were there last night till 8:00, like trying to we pre-test all the miners. We take them there. 10 miners don't want to work the same way that they were working, like literally down the street. And we had to like fix things, right, and just like stick it through to do the maintenance to keep the things running. So there is some education on just like training yourself to be confident and understanding how to get things fixed, that kind of thing. So just trying small and doing it around another group of folks that are around it. So there's a ton of meetups. Go to the meetups, the mining conference, things that are mining conferences, not like just any conference. Some conferences are shill fest, but like things that have nothing to do with mining, but mining focused things. You'll find a lot of like-minded people. And it kind of takes a gut check to find out, what their intentions are, how long they've been asking questions. How long have you been in it? Have you done it before? Get an opportunity to go out and see some sites, that kind of thing. And then just get in, like be a participant. That's the first kind of main thing, is just getting in there to do it yourself first, to understand it. Cause then it kind of gives you a gut check when you're talking to other people. And that, I think that's the biggest thing is like they have like USB ones on these days they're probably on eBay, but like it's the same thing. It's just like one small chip, low wattage. It does exactly the same thing as the bigger stuff. It's just not as much hash output, obviously, but it does, like, you can connect to a pool. You can understand how wallets work, how you transfer stuff out. A lot of the newer pools now, I think Brains is doing it now. I think Foundry does it too, to Lightning. So you can get your Satoshi payout, even if it's a small amount now, right? Mm-hmm. So you don't have to wait for your threshold to hit like $200 or something, which would take your S19 now probably 6 months to get to, if you had a single one. So like you can get the payouts, understand how that works. there's a whole bunch of other things we haven't even talked about when it comes to like cashing out and having your accounts set up. One of the longest lead time items right now is getting like an Uphold or a Coinbase account if you're doing it for a company. There's a lot of things they ask for because they're essentially still under the what they call the safe harbor kind of rules, where they're just trying to capture everything from a custodial standpoint. Like, who are you? What got you in? What's your investment portfolios? They ask a lot of things for like the business side. And I know several miners that just open up a personal account and then just send their mining proceeds there. It complicates things like with your taxes if you're in the US, because you're taking your company mining and you're cashing it out on your personal, and it's accruals and all kinds. It creates an accounting nightmare for people. So just shutting up like the business accounts alone, that kind of stuff, is something to learn, for the bigger teams. I mean, we've had to help many people just on that piece, and I think that's part of it, is understanding all the elements that go into it. It's not just the hardware and plugging it into a network. Once you get it, unless you're keeping it all, you have to pay for your power. It's like, how do you exchange that? What's the best way to exchange? Do you make it just a market sell? You're going to pay a higher fee. If you do a market order to where you're setting it out there, now you're a market maker, so it's cheaper for you to sell it. You don't pay as much fee versus being, somebody that's just market selling. They're going to charge you a higher fee. So there's a cost of capital almost on what you've earned, to make that transaction on an exchange, and then you transact out of it. If you just do a straight ACH, it costs you money. If you do a wire, it's not as much money, that kind of stuff. So like, there's all these little things, that you have to, most people just learn kind of paying the pain of it. Like, I don't want to do that again. That was way too much money, and then they try to find it out, and you kind of find the hard way. So anywhere, folks can save people time on that is a big one, and money.
Absolutely. It's there's a lot of places for people to go. And I think what you said about, just buying a rig, buying some kind of hardware, whether, like you said, an S9 or maybe even a BitX, because you can pick those up pretty cheap and they're pre-configured. Just getting in and kind of dealing with the hurdles as they come through. And there's, like we've talked about in this episode, there's plenty of content out there now where you can really decipher what you're trying to figure out. And, you've got 900 plus videos or hours of content out there. I'm sure that, there's plenty for people to find. So, the last question I want to ask you today, and we ask everyone this question, we like to get a different range of answers. So what does Bitcoin mean to you?
I think there's not a lot of things in life that has like true freedom to it. The fact that I can wake up and participate, not ask any permission. It's like everything has tape. Everything. Like I want to go buy a car. I want to do anything. I want to spend money anywhere. Like, it's like everything's being recorded. It's all like, who am I? Like, there's so much information being gathered on everything we do. And then when you think of just how liberating the fact of, I always go back to when we started mining very first, and it just was showing up, actually the jingle, the music to BBT for the very first episode, it has like a one verse rap to it. And it's like, you're making money when you sleep. It's a good night. Like you're waking up and your cell flipping 100%. They need all your attention. If you don't give them that, the Bitsbetrippin, right? That was our verse, right? It's like, it was the fact that you could do that without any permission, that, and it shows you what, in my opinion, like kind of freedom, like I don't have to ask anybody. Like, it just happens. And I'm a participant, and all these other folks, see it too, like we share the same reality, right, of it. Once you get it, and you kind of like if you ever been to a meetup and you see that excitement that first time, like there isn't a lot of subjects that pull people together like that. And like, when you go to a meetup, when everybody's kind of into it and you're like, okay, these are my people, right? Like, I get it. Like, that's, I think, probably one of the strongest pieces to me personally. And then just sharing, like, the majority of the content that we share, a lot of people aren't putting a lot of hate on, right? It's observe report. I'm just kind of sharing my way. Like, you see so many other things out there that people will share and they're like, oh, you're just virtue signaling or you're doing this or whatever. And it's like, no, dude, we're just mining Bitcoin and this is how we're doing it. Like, I'm not, it's just like, if you find something that I could be doing better, please tell me. And then we all kind of share that kind of experience online with each other. And like, by and large, it's not super toxic in some way. When we're talking mining, I get the politics and the premise of maximalism. I get that, totally respect it. And the that's the difference between like execution and the why, the politics side of it. But like with mining, it's so visceral. I mean, like we literally go plug a machine in there. It is a lot of work. Like, you got to physically put the machines in there. They got to have airflow. You got to continuously maintenance them. It's an effort. But then, there's something like last night I made this video that on X, and it was just, I wasn't talking. I just recorded the action of what was happening now that it's on, and walk outside and the sunset's coming. I'm like, this is zen for, a Bitcoin nerd. Right. So it just felt good.
Basic maintenance.
Fruit of the labor. Yeah.
That's
I don't
awesome.
know. I think that's it. I think it's the freedom of Bitcoin to me is freedom of like true, like, I don't have to ask for permission for stuff, and it's good embodied in like an action and a thing. So
you get to go out and do what you want to do, and nobody's telling you can't. And if they are, you're telling them to shove it, basically.
Well, yeah, and even at the government, and think about we've talked, we've had leadership government. I've went and talked at government events, and the thing I always put back to him was like, you're literally just a participant on this. You can't control it. There's no single point of failure. There's, and like that's I think they're discovering that. I think Senate, House, presidents around the world, they're understanding that you can't stop it. It's now hit that point of no return type of thing, unless you hit an EMP across the whole planet or something. But we have far other issues than Bitcoin if that happens, right? So there is I think a discovery, and the incentives are set up so well to where, like we do with our power company, when we were talking, they're like, well, what happens if a regulatory thing comes in? I said, you see that container and it's just anchored with some, rebar, like I can lift and shift that literally overnight. And something like we just shown over the last 2 weeks, we can build them quickly. Mm-hmm. I could do that same thing anywhere on the planet, right? So it's like, if we align with the right construction folks, we set up those agreements, we can lift and shift. So like if there's, and we've seen it with China, I think the base case has been set. If government comes in and tries to regulate it too hard, people move it. If they go and cut the cord, they move it faster. I mean, look at the network effect is there. We can see it. It went down. They announced it in May of 21. And by August, you had the dip in June. You had the price dip too, because people were like, it was unsure. Uncertainty brings risk avoidance for some folks. They start selling, and then you've seen it bounce right back. And in November of 21, when they saw the network return, most of it in the U.S., that cradle to grave, essentially some of the larger entities were doing exactly what we just did, right? Where they were like, get them here, and we'll get them plugged in. And so they had some locations like, some of the transition period for that, which we helped, from just, having Zoom calls with people and helping them get it done quick through 21. And that's part of the reason why we built our own setup in October of 21, right, of 53 machines, is that we were being called to like, hey, we have pallets of machines showing up. We need to get this hooked up. How can we get this hooked up fast? And it was like, well, here's the kind of air ducting that you need to do. Because if you look at, there wasn't a ton of content when stuff was in China because of the Great Firewall of China. They weren't sharing. You'd see some pictures every once in a while, but you never saw walkthroughs of like facilities in China, right? It just wasn't readily available. So the funny thing is some of these larger companies that were calling us were like, I'm sharing our 2,500 GPU farm in Wisconsin, right? Like regularly, and it shows like warehouses of stuff and heating and cooling and airflow and all this. So people were calling us saying, hey, I got these many pallets showing up. we're going to deploy this. What's a good config? And it was just a gut check, right? We didn't have to go out there and build it for them, but they were just like, hey, you have a facility. We're about to put a whole bunch in a thing. What do we have to consider? And it's hot, cold lane setups and that kind of thing. So it's like it went cradle to grave very quick. So I think the society understands it. And I think that's like kryptonite when you start talking to like Congress and stuff. You're like, hey, if you guys over-regulate or you push too much or you add like a bill like what happened in New York, where they come in there with like the crypto bill and they push most of the mining out of New York. I mean, stuff that came, 2 of the containers we bought for our other site came from Niagara Falls. So it was like a company that was going to deploy there. And then all this regulation came in New York State, and they're like, yeah, we're dipping, we're out. Right. So it happened overnight. And I think those examples are back to the politician, all back to the leaders and saying, hey, we can shift as fast as you push back on us. And that's the way Bitcoin network is. And Bitcoin. America's the leader right now in mining. So like America likes to be number one in things. And that's our number one pushback to the leadership is like, hey, you still want to be number one or do you want to give it up? Like,
and maybe that's kind of what we're seeing in the shift in regulation and the shift in public opinion. But I mean, either way, Bitcoin's going to succeed with or without us. We just want to be part of that process of succeeding. So, well, Michael, we appreciate you very much for coming on the show today. I think that our guests learned a lot. I definitely learned a good amount, and it was a really good conversation. One real quick thing we want to do before we let you go is we want to give you free conference tickets to our mining conference in September. So September 27th through the 29th in Brainerd, Minnesota. We're having a conference that's mining and mining only, very family oriented. So, we'd love for you to come out, check it out, hang out with us, talk mining with all the plebs and with the industry execs that'll be there. So we'll send you some details after the show.
Awesome.
We hope to see you out there. So
that sounds great.
Yeah.
That was fun.
Yeah, it was. Real quick, will you just, tell everybody where they can find you if they want to reach out to you and know that you're a wealth of information? So people are probably going to want to do that.
Yeah, for sure. So we have a website, bitsbetrippin.io. That gets you to all the major things, a lot of the content. So links to all of our X. I'm most active on X lately, just quick videos. I try to do a daily vlog out there. So just seeing, 2 to 4 minutes from an attention standpoint. And then larger format videos on YouTube on Bitsbetrippin. You'll know that you're in the right one. We're about 86 or so thousand subscribers there. So, you're in the right one. I think there's a few clones out there. But that's our main stuff out there is X and YouTube, and then our website. And our website has a whole forum thing. You can book time, all that kind of fun stuff too. So.
That's great. Well, seriously, thank you so much, Michael. Like, this was amazing, and we'll make sure we put all that in the show notes. And Will, do you have any last words to say before we close out?
No, I'm good. I'm just super grateful that Michael joined us, and I love the stories. Sure. The wealth of knowledge is apparent, and I just think, we got to have him back so we can dive deeper, see kind of another chapter of the success of this latest build he just put together, and keep exploring some of these geopolitical conversations.
Yeah.
And that's it's super important for this, where we're taking innovation and where we're taking the Bitcoin network. So thank you so much, Michael.
Yeah, for sure.
All right, guys, like and subscribe, comment, share. If you guys really enjoyed it, we want to hear your feedback. Hit us up on Fountain. We'd love to do that. So we'll see you guys next time.
Please note, the Build a Mind podcast provides information for general educational purposes only. This information should not be construed as legal, financial, or investment advice. We do not guarantee the accuracy or completeness of any information presented, and we encourage you to consult with a professional advisor, legal advisor, and/or financial advisor before making any financial decisions. The Build a Mind podcast and its affiliates are not responsible for any losses incurred as a result of using the information provided.